This is my review for the PlayStation 1 JRPG Xenogears. I was a little surprised to see that there aren't a lot of reviews available for this game right now, so I thought I'd go ahead and try and do it myself. This is my first review ever, so I hope you guys enjoy it. The game was directed and created by Tetsuya Takahashi, previously done work on Squaresoft's Final Fantasy V, VI, and Chrono Trigger, among others. It was co-created with his future wife, Kaori Tanaka, also known as Soraya Saga, who had worked as a map designer for Squaresoft. Masato Kato, future director of Chrono Cross, would also join as a scriptwriter. Yasunori Mitsuda, legendary composer of Chrono Trigger, topped off the Dream Team. Also, the dude who created Final Fantasy and this other guy were involved somehow too. I definitely want to mention Yasunori Mitsuda, the game's composer. His score contributes just as much, if not more, than the art design and story of Xenogears. Much of it is his own style, but also includes Celtic influences. Yasunori's music has been the highlight of his previous works, Chrono Trigger, its sequel Chrono Cross, Monolith Soft's Xenosaga Episode 1, and also the upcoming game Xenoblade Chronicles by Monolith Soft. The Xenogears tracks run through the spectrum of emotions from joy to sorrow to excitement, sometimes simultaneously. If there's any part of this game that can hold up to criticism of the modern age, it's definitely going to be the music. Xenogears was released February 11, 1998 in Japan, and later that year, October 20th in North America. I was just 12 back then, so in my eyes it was Final Fantasy combined with anime combined with mecha, rolled up in an 80-hour story. Having just come from the Super Nintendo JRPGs, and also Final Fantasy VII and the PlayStation 1, I started to notice many similarities in mythology and design. This was definitely a Squaresoft game, but wasn't really Final Fantasy. Instead of 3D character models overlaid on 2D static backgrounds, we had 2D drawn sprites with fully 3D camera backgrounds. Actually, I started to notice many similarities with Chrono Trigger. Besides a young inventor girl giving you the intro tutorial, both games include the 3 Gurus of Wisdom, a godlike enemy, and a journey to a kingdom in the sky. Soraya Saga, who created the characters Edgar and Sabin of Final Fantasy VI, my favorite personal FF game, also squeezed a few homages into the story. In Final Fantasy VII and Xenogears, both contain little Easter eggs to each other. To discuss what's important about Xenogears, we need to talk about the game mechanics and the characters. But before that, really what we want to do is show gears. Lots and lots of gears. Gears are the giant robot mecha of the Xenogears universe. Gears that fight, gears that transform, gears with religious subtext, ghetto gears, ugly gears, badass gears, and thinly veiled references to Voltron. As for the battle system, it's ostensibly similar to Chrono Cross, which has a light, medium, and heavy attack button. They're laid out like a fighting game and mapped to face buttons. As you try new commands, you accumulate ability points that eventually unlock these moves, or death blows, as they're called. Death blows are going to be your bread and butter against bosses and tough enemies. The system works very similarly when your characters pilot Gears, whose moveset carries over from what death blows you've learned on foot. You build up your attack level by doing the weak, medium, or heavy attacks, and then choose your corresponding gear death blow. Later in the game, when you get your special elemental death blows, you will also gain access in Gears to Infinity Attack level, or Hyper Mode, for some very fancy gear death blows, the equivalent of Final Fantasy limit breaks. Some quick tips: gear buffs that claim to decrease defense actually don't, so feel free to use those with abandon. Stock up on magnetic coats earlier in the game when you can. Equipping 2 to 3 to a gear makes them impossible to hit, especially when Bart uses Wild Smile to decrease enemy accuracy. In Nissan, try to save up for at least one ether doubler. It is the most broken item in the game and allows you to double your magic power for double the casting cost. Equipping it on foot and then jumping in your gear means that several abilities that use ether in their formulas but don't cost ether points will be doubled for no extra cost while you're in your gear. Ellie's air rods and Billy's Jessie gun later in the game will be major boss killers and work hand in hand with the ether doubler. On foot, Satan is your go-to character. He already is twice as fast as your other characters, 4 times as fast with speed shoes, and give him a power crisis to let him one-shot bosses. With all these tips, you can even win an unwinnable boss fight later, although it takes some luck. Without going into too much detail, the story revolves around Faye, an amnesiac young man, and his friends who battled the Empire of Solaris. Along the way, they discover more about each other, themselves, and the world around them, which include many factions, countries, and kingdoms. The scope of the plot eventually becomes very large and covers controversial topics such as psychology and religion. Many of the characters like Satan and Bart have very fleshed out backstories that affect the main plot. However, other characters like Rico and Maria end up not having a significant impact on the plot at all. Surprisingly, it's actually the villains of the story who are much more interesting than the protagonist and main supporting cast. Each of the antagonists have a very deep and tragic backstory. Earlier on in the game, it may be a little annoying how vague or overly cryptic some of their lines are, but by the end of the game, they become a lot more fleshed out. Graf, one of the major antagonists of the game, is personally one of my favorite video game characters of all time. Although I admit, it gets a little repetitive when he keeps asking people if they desire the power or not. Not all the characters are hits, unfortunately. One of which is the not quite extinct furry monster Choo Choo, and I think it speaks for itself. The unfortunate thing is, Choo Choo is actually one of the best characters in the game. Even though a number of critics find the gameplay tedious and the story convoluted and confusing, it's hard to deny the sheer scope of the game's world. Xenogears is one of many JRPGs of this era, where you can really feel the love and care that was put in and the strength of the vision behind the developers. If you're an old school gamer that loves a good story at the forefront that's involved and compelling, or maybe if you just like giant robots, I encourage you to go and play this game now. This has been my review of Xenogears. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.